Hi, Rashik. Thank you very much for joining Secrets of Talent. Really appreciate your time. Rashik, when I was doing the research into the preparation for this conversation, I noticed you're a BCS member as a student. How does that feel to actually go from being a student to a chief executive of the company?
Hey, I never expected to progress to being the chief exec or take any kind of role. And it's kind of a bit bizarre, but it's actually quite good in some ways because I've seen the organization from many different perspectives over the years as I've been a member.
Yeah, what was that journey? What was that journey in between? So, from being a student up to kind of where you are now.
Yeah, when I first joined, BCS was the way I used to find out about where technology was going. They had various publications and groups that would help you as a young professional understand the future of technology. It was a way of building networks. So I got to meet many of the colleagues. Often the colleagues I'd meet were from the work environment, but sometimes also from BCS environment. Some of the events were quite helpful. And as it progressed, it became a platform to share what I'd learned, and that was quite useful to help. When you've got to present something, it makes sure you really sort of home in on what do you know and don't go beyond what you don't know and all that kind of stuff, right? So that it was quite useful to build the personal skills around communications and those things. And then over time, I got involved in some of the boards. So I was on the organization employer board. I was involved in some of the working groups. So kind of seeing bits of the organization from the inside. And then finally, as I retired from IBM, I thought, this is the kind of institution where I should spend some more time. So I was applying for some of the senior volunteering roles in some of the boards and chairing the boards. And then this role of CEO, the headhunter actually called me and said, "Why don't you apply for this?" And I thought, I never get it. And so I applied, never expecting to get it. I thought it's just, why not give it a go? And I went from the long list to the short list to the it's yours. And I thought, oh bleep, I better go do this now then.
For context, I should have answered this in the first place. What is BCS? And for those who may not know
Of
BCS,
course, yeah. So BCS is a British Society for Computers, and it's also the Chartered Institute for IT. So it's the basis for the professionalism agenda in the IT industry.
fantastic. And you mentioned quite briefly you were at IBM. I know the career wasn't brief at IBM.
No, I was at IBM for 39 years. Yeah, so I joined straight from university. In fact, I worked at IBM as an intern for 2 summers, and then I progressed through IBM to become. When I retired last year, I was the IBM Fellow and VP for Technology. So effectively, IBM's Chief Technology Officer for Europe, Middle East, and Africa.
Bit of a journey that must have been as well. And clearly, you must have seen sort of tech changed over the time. I mean, what are the sort of key things that have stuck out to you from when you were a student to what you're looking at now when you're working with students?
Yeah, so the technology when I first started. I mean, to put it in perspective, the first computer program I wrote was on paper tape.
Oh,
So I go back, understand paper tape. I've written programs on punch cards, and so I've seen it from that point, and the notion that there's a market for 6 computers in the world was where we thought, right? And that progressed to the launch of the IBM personal computer in the early 80s, where a computer on every home was a possibility. And now there's multiple computers. In fact, most cars are computers on wheels. So yeah, technology is in all aspects of our life. And I would have never predicted that level of change in my lifetime, in my career, right? And I think we're still in its infancy. I can see that technology has a huge role to play in addressing many of the societal issues that we have, in in providing some of the underlying fabric for how we live and work.
Do you think that technology has been accelerated more in the last few years versus when during your tenure at IBM, as an example?
Yeah, so there's a famous Moore's law which says that every 18 months we double the number of uh, uh, transistors that are in the world, right? So transistor is a fundamental component for computing. And so when you're doubling at that kind of pace, then you will find exponential growth, and that will continue. There's this talk of the Moore's law ending, and we're not going to grow at that exponential rate. And every year they predict this in the next 4 or 5 years is going to stop. And every year scientists find new innovations which keep that Moore's law going. And yeah, it may slow down, but I think it's going to keep going because we will see advances in different ways. So things like quantum computing, which is now starting on its exponential journey, that will make a step change in how we drive computing. We've got AI, which is a very different way of doing computing using our computers, and so we may not double the number of transistors, but the impact of that computing will grow exponentially. So just to give you perspective, the number of AIs that we have in the world is definitely growing exponentially. There's a great website called There's an AI for It, and that kind of shows how fast that's growing. And just to give you another little snippet, the use of the energy consumption of AI is doubling every 3 months. So if that gives you that gives you an indication of how much extra AI capability we have out there, and that's going to be fundamental in everything. Things like ChatGPT, Bard, bringing that into the way Microsoft brings it into Bing, and all of these things mean that intelligence will give us tremendous potential, tremendous impact, and it'll challenge the way we think.
I'll come on to AI in a bit because I think you've mentioned some quite interesting points on AI.
Yeah.
How has talent changed in the tech world, and how has businesses have had to adapt when it comes to the change in talent as well?
Yeah. So let's just think about where tech was when I first joined back in the early. If I go back to the 1950s, 1960s, and you went into Chicago, and you went to go and see the Chicago Banking Corporation, as it was called then, you'd find a big banking hall of thousands of people who were writing the accounts in the bank accounts. They kept accounts by actually physically writing in books. All of those jobs have now gone. Right? All of that work that was done by clerical administrative staff has largely been replaced. And so it has had a profound impact on the range of jobs and the range of activities in a business. I was recently talking to some people who look after a yogurt factory, right? And they take raw yogurt at one end and create fruit yogurt at the other end. And if you go back a few years ago, there'd be thousands of people working in this factory. That whole factory manufacturing all of those tubs of yogurt that leave every day, and there's tons of yogurt that comes through that organization. 6 people doing that, right? And that's today, right? And yet, then you say, well, if that's what's been happening, then there should be mass unemployment because all the work that was out there shouldn't be needed anymore. And yet we've got less unemployment now than we have back then. So you kind of say, well, what's been going on here? What's actually been happening? Well, what's been happening is we find ways of stepping above what that automation and that digitization is. And just as the pace of that innovation happens, the pace of that digitization happens, we find a way to get above that. And we find new value that humans can provide and leverage those computers, right? And so the phrase I often use is be digital or be digitized. Right? If the activity that you do isn't being digitized, then somebody will find a way of digitizing it in the future. And once it gets digitized, your value becomes less and less. I wrote the 3 laws of digitization. You can go find it in one of my blogs a few years back. And once that gets digitized, your value becomes reduced to the point where whatever gets digitized eventually becomes free. And if it becomes free, you've got to use the data from digitization to create new value, new business models, and create new capability. And that's what's happening. So things like Uber, right? So you think about what happened 10 years ago. If I phoned for a taxi and said I want to go from the office to the train station, the person at the other end of the taxi service would say, the taxi can be there in 10 minutes. Now, you didn't know whether that was a guess or a lie. You knew it's somewhere in there, but you didn't know where it was, right? So what Uber did, and what that creates is uncertainty for you as an individual, right? What Uber did is said, well, I'm going to give you a digital representation of that taxi on a little map that you can have on your phone, and that will tell you exactly where the taxi is. And when I say it's 9 minutes, you can see it's 9 minutes, and that gives you a level of certainty. So a lot of what we're doing with digitization is finding where uncertainty exists and removing it. Or we're finding where activity is done and automating it, digitizing it. And that will continue to happen over the years. But then somebody still has to be sat above that and drive those systems. And it tends to create more jobs than it actually destroys.
So then AI will be something that's used for a lot of companies to drive some of that change. But
Yep.
should companies see AI as a positive thing or a threat to existing roles? And how should they take or how should they embrace AI?
Look, so AI is just another tool, right? Just as you in a process of manufacturing, you will use different tools. AI is another tool, and you should look at AI in one of a few ways, right? The first one is anything physical. By using sensors and connectivity and AI, I'll make that physical thing more intelligent, right? So it will tell you when it's run out of paper. It will tell you that this car needs to go in this direction. So it helps simplify and automate the use of different technologies. The second thing is whatever human activities there are, AI will help us automate aspects of what we do and remove routine drudgery out of our lives to allow us to focus on more creative, more intelligent stuff. It will help us find where there is uncertainty in processes. Right? So you think about the uncertainty around the taxi example, it'll help find those uncertainties which span multiple organizational boundaries. It will also help us understand the spectrum of data that's out there, right? So remember, there's something like 40 exabytes of data a few years ago from like been doubling every year since that time as well. And that data, just to make sense of that, requires a huge amount of AI. So that will continue to happen. And the last thing you will do is we will use that ability to create new kind of virtual environments that we can use for different things. So it doesn't mean that we're going to live in those virtual environments. The new kind of provision, or it's not that's where we're going to live. It will augment what we do to help us be more effective and make the process of living more valuable, more engaging, and allow us to focus on things that we care about.
So what skills should companies invest in to ensure that they are ready for effectively the future of work when it comes to computing, when it comes to AI, and you mentioned obviously quantum
Yep.
as a
Yep. Yep.
what sort of the skills are there that they should be embracing?
So the first thing is it's not just about skills. It starts with your mindset. Do you have a mindset for this future era? We talk about this notion of be digital or be digitized. So you've got to recognize that life going forward is going to be ever changing, right? So the mindset, the attitude you need to have is firstly to focus on learning to learn, right? We all learn in different ways. As humans, we've had different experiences. So to learn is a first core skill you have. The second core skill and mindset attribute, I would say, is you've got to understand what you care about, right? Because if you don't care, then you won't do it, right? So you've got to know what you really care about and focus on the things that you really care about. And the last thing is, it's about recognizing that all of us have anxieties and fears and uncertainty, right? We all have that kind of element of what you might call imposter syndrome. But the opportunity here is to say, how do I do less of the things that keep me awake at night and do more of the things that get me up in the morning, right? So if you start to think about those things that get me up in the morning, then that will help you. So it's about understanding who you are and understanding how you work and behave as an individual. So it's partly the other bits as well, but those are the kind of three core attributes of the mindset, if you like. And then in terms of real technical stuff, right? There are 5 core things that people need to learn, right? And it's about being more data savvy is a kind of overarching theme here. The first one is whether you do this or whether you get somebody else to do it for you, you've got to understand the data that's out there. So I refer to this as the squirrel skill set. And the squirrels hoard data, capture data, catalog data, so that you know where that data is, right? The second kind of attribute is, and the type of animal is the owl. And the owl attribute skill set is you need to understand what that data can do as a transformative potential. What are the problems out there that we need to use this digitization to solve? The third kind of skill set is the skill set of the fox. And the fox or the wolf is the cunning algorithmic geek who knows how to write that bit of code and and helps figure out how to use that code to really create insight or create that bit of AI that creates that sort of insight. Right. The fourth skill set is the skill set of the weaver bird. Now the weaver bird's a tiny little bird, but it's an engineer. It builds those big, robust nests to attract its mate. In the same way, the data engineer, or that skill set, is how do I build a robust, reliable pipeline of taking data to create the insights that allow somebody to take a decision and create the kind of impact. And then the final skill set is a skill set of the hawk. And the hawk needs to worry about the ethics, legality, and privacy of how this data makes value, right? So there's a kind of mindset piece, and there's 4 core skill sets, and you can't do all of those. So you've got to partner with others as you go through the value chain of taking data to value, and make sure that you've got those people who support you on that journey.
It's a very interesting structure, that is, and I might steal that one. So, final question to yourself, Rashik, is thinking back to your 20-year-old self many years ago when you were a student yourself, and if you were to give advice to your 20-year-old self about what the future of work looks like, what would that be?
I always say it's very easy to kind of go back and look at yourself and say, you could have done that better and so on. And I don't think that's the right thing to do. I think the right thing to do is recognize that you live your life moment by moment. Make sure that you're the best you can be at that moment. Live your life with gratitude. So be grateful for what you have, and that gratitude will give you the ability to then find the connections that make life worthwhile. And you'll show up and be your best, right? You can only do what you can do, but you can only do it one moment at a time. So make that moment count.
Rashik, thank you very much for that.
Pleasure. Great talking to you, and hope that listeners enjoy that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.